Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and in this video I am trying something very different. So today I am going to be reviewing my old comprehensive Warden guide from 2017 that was last updated during update 20. I thought this would be a fun idea, and I do honestly expect it to be a bit of a long video because that guide was so long. And for anybody unfamiliar, I wrote this during the Gondor days of LOTRO, like Old Anorian time, and it was meant to be something that was very comprehensive and detailed and hopefully last in the future and actually still have a lot of relevant information, even if gearing and that type of stuff would be outdated. But it was also actually one of the first text guides that I ever wrote, and it is hosted on this Datus LOTRO Guides website still there. That is where I'm going to be reviewing it today, but I mainly plan to critique it and talk about all the outdated stuff and see what has changed with the Warden, as well as critiquing my writing style a little bit, so that should be interesting. And I think nowadays I at least have a lot more experience with guides and writing in general, so I can just see how I have grown a little bit and share that with you all. But I actually do hope this guide will be helpful as well for maybe some people to learn about the Warden class, because I will honestly probably be going into a lot of detail with the Warden throughout this. So yeah, this should be quite the adventure, and I am pretty excited for it. Alright, so we have moved onto the website and onto the first page of the Warden guide, which, by the way, I think there are 14 pages, so that is pretty crazy. As I mentioned, it is very long. So the entire guide is up to date with update 20, June 17. Update 20 was the Waste, so was the one before Mordor. I called that version 2.0 apparently, and that is where I ended, and there were no Warden changes since I published it at that time. There, of course, have been changes since then. So the way we will be going through this is following the actual guide layout. We'll go through the intro, then the Warden basics, gambits, specs and roles, rotation, character building, leveling, and then frequently asked questions and catalog and the ending. And then I did have a little bit about me to start, basically about my YouTube channel. I don't know if a lot of that is up to date. I actually see a link to the LOTRO subreddit, and yes, my main LOTRO presence still is on YouTube. And I am also still active on the LOTRO subreddit, and getting into what the guide is about, I think I made a video on it. Wow, we could actually play this. Okay, that audio. Probably shouldn't have had that in the audio. It was a pretty cool intro, though, as far as the Warden doing the two skills there. I don't know about the text and all that. I probably wouldn't do it like that today, but anyway, that is what is going on with that, and it has all my wonderful videos recommended if you watch that. That is great. But about the guide, it is very extensive. That is, I think, going to be true about the Warden class, all that. Goal is to give up-to-date information for beginners and experienced players alike, and hope everybody will find useful information. It's all text and image-based, and then I will have some videos, and I said I will try to keep it updated. That did not happen after update 20. I did do a little bit of updates with it, but never really got around too much to it. And then I talked a little bit about my Warden experience, and by the way, I do plan to have my Warden story videos coming sometime this year. I honestly should get back to those, but I have a lot done where I actually should be getting towards doing those. I actually talked about World of Warcraft and Hearthstone, and then there's Rift, which I know I just played very recently. I even mentioned that. But this is my Warden. The one right here is my Warden on Arkenstone, my original Warden. And I also mentioned it looks like a little bit of a Let's Play I was doing on a leveling Warden, which we might, if this video isn't too long, I might get towards that towards the end of this and actually look at that with you all. And I have way more than 2 Wardens now. That's a very small number. But anyway, these are all of the parts, and I think we can kind of get the idea of what the Warden class basics, all that sort of stuff is about, so I won't read all of that. And just so y'all know, I will be skimming through a ton of this. At least that is the plan, just because I know it is so long. It looks like I had a gameplay video of just the Warden here. Ooh, that intro is very bad. Very rough with the colors. I don't know what was going through me to actually think that. This is actually a really fun time with the Warden, though. I talked about Osgiliath being a fun part of the Warden, and this is partially why. It's a little bit blurry right now. I guess the embedded quality is only 480p by default, so that's what's going on there. But yeah, the Warden was fun. I think I also soloed a Moomac here, which is also fun. But anyway, I wanted to share that because it really was a fun time for the Warden. And then why choose Warden? Well, there are a ton of reasons to choose Warden. Why to not choose Warden? Yeah, the range DPS is not really too true anymore. The weak support, it's a little bit weird with the Yellow Line Warden being support. I still don't really consider it much of a support, even though it does in fact have a tiny bit of support with it. Complicated is a reason to choose Warden. I'd actually agree with that, but it is also a reason to not choose Warden. And this looks like my old profile picture. I guess it's whatever I used on this website. The same About Me section, it looks like. Anyway, moving on to the third page, we have basics to the Warden equipment. This is all, none of this stuff has really changed. That is all good. The stats, that is good as well. Stances, we still have the melee and rage stance. We have musters, gambit system, all this sort of basic details. I actually do like this. I have to admit, this part of the guide I still like. That is really good with the bullet points, I think, and going off to the side with all the extra points. We're getting close to springtime, and apparently that is not good for my nose right now, but getting back to the actual guide, we do have all these skill themes still, so that is all good. The tiers is with the heal over times and damage over times, that is still true. These are all just acronyms, and I really don't use MTOT. I mainly use MT, HOT, DOT, don't really use OT, and then AoE. Single target, ST, that's actually one I would put in there now. These are all the tiers for the gambits, like the debuffs, like Surety of Death, for example, would be, I think, a tier 3 debuff. Tier 3 damage over time, light AoE damage over time, rather. And then a little bit, so I know I went into extreme detail with this guide, so I did all these basic concepts, and then I did a review with basically all this stuff, just making it much shorter. I don't know if that was really necessary. So here are the specs and roles. Yeah, I would not really call this range support / DPS. I would call it range DPS, and I'd actually specify this as melee DPS. And actually, a lot of people at level 130 now run Yellow Line more as a hybrid melee / range DPS, which is what I do as well on Louisden. So the Warden is strong and weak. Yes, they can solo very well. They have many heals to stay alive. They're versatile. And weaknesses, yes, medium armor class instead of heavy. This, I think at the time it actually was significant for endgame content because the way tanking has changed from evasion based to, or where basically BPE, block, parry, and evade were actually more useful way back early, even before this guide. It's gone more towards maximum morale, mitigating damage, and with the captain having crazy support to go with all that. But yeah, that is, wow, we're actually zooming through this. We're already done with page 3 and we're not even 10 minutes into this video. And here are some honestly ugly, what are these things even called? I honestly don't remember what these big pictures are called. Infographics. Yeah, it actually says right here in infographics. So these are honestly ugly with that text. That is not too clear text, has some weird shading going on. I do like the Warden picture and how it fits with that and the theme, and it is consistent at least with all the text and the color there, but yeah, I would not make it like that nowadays. Anyway, this I think is still mostly up to date with actually what these do. There might be little details with the damage and all that type of stuff that change. I know marked and diminished target, I don't even have diminished target here, but those have changed as well. Critical strike. This one is a very useless skill still. It is not a good skill, but this is an important note. You do have a class D to use it. So in the fray, assailment. Wow, this is long paragraph there. We will not read. Javelin skills. I think some of these, the javelin skills has changed over the years. And then some movement abilities, utility abilities, and survival. Okay. One whole skill, which is never surrender. And then, yeah, I think most of the rest will be on the gambits. This is a lot of the guide is on gambits in the background with them. So first we'll have an introduction to the gambit system and basic gambits. Then you have the gambits, gambit lines, and chains. Then masteries, recoveries, preparation, and memory. These are all like the additional parts of gambits that aren't like directly gambits with these. And then you have assailment, range stance, and how that changes everything. Then a detailed look with multiple sections at the gambits, gambit lines, and chains, and their effectiveness. So these are the infographics I made for all the gambit skills as they were in 2017 as far as what they do, and hopefully y'all can see this okay. I know opening tabs with my display capture might look a little bit weird, but yeah, this is what it was like. Here's assailment, range stance, and just for a little bit of something I know that has changed is ranged unerring strike used to always do a damage over time effect, or it did not used to. Nowadays it does always do a damage over time effect, and it actually says that on what it does. And I also know, I don't know if during this guide, it does not look like during this guide, but these light dots were very frequently bugged where the secondary damage over here would actually be a lot weaker than it should be. That might be a red line thing. There is actually the Warden gameplay that we might get to a little bit later. That is a sort of more embarrassing video. That is why I'm saving it for the end. Let's see, yeah, in the frame, assailment, we did all that. These are just the builders, Gambit default, offensive strike. I think this is an example. Again, this is very detailed. A lot of the stuff you honestly should just get playing the Warden, I think, in just playing it for a few minutes, you should understand how all that works. The number referencing is good. I basically went through every single Gambit in the game and told you what they did. Even though you can read the icons, it's still good maybe to have like a short form of what they do. But yeah, going through all this detail and then slowly introducing the game, I still kind of get the idea of that, but it really is long and probably something most people don't need to read, but maybe good background for some. Then we have, I think these are the finishers we're getting to. Gambits Part 2, cover the how to build gambits, some more gambits, and then even more gambits. And now we are working on 4 gambit skills, and I think this is where we're getting to finishers and chains and that type of stuff. So gambit chains are ones where the final gambits, like Restoration, it says the skill is most powerful when you've used Persevere and Safeguard, which is still true today, but those are the gambit chains, the ones that actually have finishing skills. And gambit chains are a version of gambit lines, it's just that they have that finishing skill point. And then the gambit lines would be ones like Unerring Strike, like the bleed line, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 and 1 2 3 1 2. These ones don't have, well, actually the bleed ones do have a chain effect. I should not have used that as an example, but something like the Fish Shield line, the AoE light dot line, that is a line and it doesn't have any chain effect. Let's see. Yeah, these are ones that chain and these are ones that do not chain. Apparently I had the Fish Shield line as chaining. I'm actually not remembering that. Maybe that's still the case. I don't really remember because it's honestly not important for Surety of Death and Desolation. That one you don't really want to chain. There's basically no point in that. That's probably why it was missing from my memory there for a moment. But it looks like we are getting to the Gambit Masteries. And these are very important for Gambit builders. It looks like I go into a lot of detail on those again. And then some of the extra stuff that we talked about. Oh no, this is, I guess, how to use it with battle preparation, battle memory, and then Gambit default, Def Strike, defensive strike goad, and then you get that and then you can use the Gambit. So I have some DPS rotation stuff. That's a little bit weird. 2 parts of battle memory, once you do that, you have that, okay. So it's a very powerful tool. So I'm just looking at a case where it is useful, okay. So that's basically an actual example to practice that in the game maybe that I had here. That's something that adds depth and length to the guide that I don't think is necessarily bad, but it's a little bit odd to just randomly have that in the like potency battle memory section of the guide, I guess. But yeah, that is everything with the gambits, and then looking how assailment changes those. So we have R ahead of all the range gambits, so it's like R1, R2, R3. And I actually still like that labeling today. It makes it pretty simple. If it has an R in front, that just means it's the range version, the assailment version, especially because people will often switch between the melee and range stance. That's something I do a lot, and I say, like, I use range resounding challenge. That's a pretty frequent gambit that I use. And that would be R3132, I believe, or 3231, R3231. And it's just an easier, quicker way to call it R3231 rather than just range resounding challenge versus resounding challenge, which would be 3231. But anyway, these are all of the range gambits. So I know the yellow line with the Warden was significantly weaker back then, but I still went through all the detail with that, it looks like. Actually, these are very useful, the AoE morale taps in the yellow line now, if you have Shadow Javelins or Barbed Javelins traded. And Resounding Challenge, I don't remember using it that much back in the day. I don't know if it was actually good or just bad and I didn't pay attention to it. It looks like the actual damage it does is not really that much, though. It seems more in line with the morale taps, which I know the morale taps have also gotten weaker over time. Why did I randomly had 1, 2, 3 like single pixel horizontal lines and then 2 pixel horizontal line there and then another single one. That's odd. But that is it with that section. Now we'll go to Gambits Part 5, and this is where we look in depth on Gambits. And I know I've been going a little bit fast over previous parts of the guide, but this is really where I want to look at basically what I rated all the Gambits as being good or bad and compare that to how they are now. So it looks like what we look for in Gambits is the total damage dealt over full duration of the dot and the immediate damage. That is true. And then the damage type a little bit, like light damage and common damage, and some are stronger against certain mitigations and things like that. That is true. I actually don't think that is still true today. I think all the mitigations, all the Warden damage goes towards the enemy's physical mitigation, even if it is technically a tactical damage type. Or, hold up, I should actually reverse this and say the damage, even if it's a tactical damage type, it pulls from the Warden's physical mastery. As far as the enemy's mitigations, I'm actually not sure if that is still true today, I should say. And then, yes, buffs and debuffs may affect damage as well. So that's the type of stuff I guess we look for. And then overtime effect duration for tanking and general defense, mount healed, all that type of stuff is still true and things you want to look for. Really in damage, the total damage dealt, number of enemies it hits, those are the most important things to look at. And I think that's really what a lot of the analyses were based on in this, is the total damage dealt over the full duration of the dot. Like when we get into the rotation type of stuff, it will be different today, I know, but that is what it was based on back in the day when I wrote this, at least. Alright, so all the potency gambits and all that, and then section 3, here's the start of the gambit line. So in this section we will work on 3-2 to 3-2-3-2 line. I wonder why I started with this gambit line, and let me actually preview. Oh wow, this is section 6. I remember this part of the guide and writing it. This was very long. Like, this is a long page and a long guide with a ton of pages. So this is where we're really getting into the detail, which is okay. But we will start from the top, right where I was with the Surety of Death line as it looks. Alright, so these are all the gambits and what they do. Here's a picture of all of them together. And I talk about spam the strongest one over, blah, blah, blah. Really, a lot of this is not needed detail. Like, all of this stuff, you can really see what they do actually in the icon there, which I had on the guide so you can literally see it all. Like this example, that type of stuff I don't think was needed anymore. Especially. So here's the situations where it's useful. This should have been a bolded section at the end that really, oh, here actually is usage. Okay, so this is mainly what I want to look at with all these. We won't go into that much detail in the rest of these, but this line is frequently used in both AoE and even single target damage, although slightly less frequently in single target, and that is still true today. This is a strong AoE damage line when you are in melee. And yes, it is one of the damage over times you need to maintain on the enemies. And this line still does not change with assailment. In the assailment stance, it's actually good to switch to melee stance when you use those. Just because you have faster animations, and currently there's the momentum trait switching from range stance to melee stance will give you a damage buff, which might change in update 29, we are not sure. But yeah, many of the ideas work with the tiering system and all that, with the Dot's Desolation being a tier higher than Surety of Death and so on for all the weaker gambits. But that is it for section 3, so let's see what the usage is. All this detail, wow. A lot of this really, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I really don't think a lot of that detail is just needed, basically. Maybe it is useful for people, I don't know. I'm not reading it all right now to even take it all in, because that would take way too long. But yeah, this is still used similarly to 3-2, the Fish Shield line. And the main difference, it's used in single target and can occasionally be weaved into AoE with battle memory. I usually don't actually have time to do that anymore with battle memory. There is just too much stuff going on with the Warden, especially if I do play Yellow Line, that there's just no time for that. And even then, weaving them into AoE with battle memory would be better with bleeds nowadays. This is a dot maintenance line, and I would actually agree, you usually can't quite fit Precise Blow into a rotation, but these are somewhat low priority. It's just based on the total damage it dealt, as we covered earlier. Basically the strength of the damage over time compared to other damage over time gambits you have. Next up, we have the bleed line, and this is very detailed with that, wow. So this is another dot maintenance line. This one's a bit different. The whole line is maintained, and here I have the gambits are often used in order for the chain effect, and that is not true today. You want to use the strongest one first. I want to use 1 2 3 1 2 and then 1 2 3 1 and then 1 2 3. That is what I do today, and I would not recommend using that in order like that as I have written there. So that is one thing that is completely out of date, I know. Let's see, this stuff, the morale taps. Okay, I wonder what I have here, because morale taps have gone through a lot of changes. Okay, so I use these gambits frequently in solo and group content, primarily in AoE situations. In solo, they are a great way to stay alive. That is still can be true. They're more of an okay way to stay alive, but they are good, I would say, if you have a huge AoE pull. The problem is the morale taps just aren't that good anymore. They're pretty weak. They don't scale that well to a very high level. So that's the thing with that. Let's see, in group content they serve the same purpose, but I really need to use them as DPS to stay alive. Yeah, don't really use them as DPS to stay alive in group content, just use them as a tank to stay alive sometimes. They can be used to gain aggro. They definitely could back in the day when they were a little bit stronger with the damage, but they're not quite as good with that now. They still do damage and heal you, so they have all the aggro going on with that, just not that much. They used to be, I know, strong enough that you can take without a healer in many cases where other group members can also survive. So running instances without a healer with a Warden tank was actually a viable strategy just because Wardens could stay alive on their own. And in AoE situations, the morale taps were a big help with that. That is maybe not completely the case today. For easier content, I think the Blue Line Warden could still stay alive enough, but the other tanks, a lot of other tanks have gained some healing capability. So like the Captain, for example, they're pretty good at staying alive on their own. Even the Guardian has gained some more heals than they used to have. Like, I don't know compared to back when I wrote this, but at least way back in the day, the Guardian has more stuff to actually heal them back up after taking damage. Let's see, as DPS they can serve a purpose as maintaining the dot for DPS. That is definitely not true today. In the yellow line, using the range version of these gambits will put a, if you have the trait for Barb Javelins or Shatter Javelins, 1 rank in that, if you have that trait, it will put a Barb Javelin bleed on the enemy, which is definitely useful, but don't want to use it just for the morale tap. I use it a lot for the actual bleed nowadays, just with the yellow line trait. But anyway, 3-1-2-3-2, maintain and frequent. This is, I don't know what that is. I guess for tanking, just like generally when you'd actually want to use it, that is the one. It would be higher. This one is only true. This one is still true, used only if you need an immediate impact. And then 1-2 is still usually not used, at least. Okay, the healing line. Whole bunch of detail here. So these fall in a situational category use, and that's true. You basically want to use them when you need a heal. And solo, if you need to stay alive and are not in a large AoE situation, these are used. I do use them solo if I really need a heal, and I think it will help me survive in a fight. Especially as the yellow line, just because they do apply that Shatter Javelin's bleed, the Barb Javelin's bleed rather, that I keep going on about. And then yeah, when tanking, I will use those proactively if I have nothing else to do, if I don't want to deal damage and do need to stay alive. That is true as well. And as a tank, they can be used as a reaction to needing a heal, and the strongest one to do that with is Restoration. Not the ranged version, but the melee version is best with that. Alright, moving on, we have section 8. We're getting almost, I think, a little bit over halfway done with this page, wow. Section 8, this is 2.3 to 2.3.2. These are a lot different nowadays, so now All of these give a percent to physical and tactical mitigation. I believe Impressive Flourish gives physical, Maddening Strike gives tactical, Dance of War gives physical, and Conviction gives tactical, something like that. But they all give a percent mitigation, so they're a lot more useful than they used to be. So getting a rating for the mitigation like that, if you're already mitigation capped, it does nothing for you since you're capped. So you want percent boost, which they actually do give now, and I believe they might give a crit defense percent, but I am not entirely sure on that. But they're probably a lot more useful than what I actually have here for tanking if you need the mitigations. The problem is they still don't give too much. And unless you're doing a higher difficulty content where you actually need those mitigations to survive, like a big hit, and that's why the Warden's weak, by the way. They don't have the mitigation health or cooldowns to survive big hits that, for example, the Captain can a lot more easily survive things like that, and the Guardian even can, just as a heavy armor class. I know Guardians are like out of the meta right now for tanking, but yeah, that is just a quick comparison to the Guardian and Captain. And same thing actually with the Beorning. They have a lot of morale. They have okay-ish cooldowns, and they have decent defenses as well. But anyway, this one used before a fight, even though I only use it if I am bored and have no other games to use before the pool. Okay, and then the Conviction, the one that actually heals. Let me, make sure I actually got the name right on that. That one is the most used one. That is still true today, and in rotation I probably still don't use it that much even when tanking, just because I never bother with tanking content that I would actually have to maintain these. And it is okay for healing the entire fellowship. Not really today. It heals them, but it heals them for such a tiny amount that it's really negligible. It is still a fun skill though. It actually looks like you're hurting your enemies, hurting your allies rather, hurting the members of your fellowship when you use it, just the animation, even though it heals them. But yeah, these two gambits are still good to prep before combat just to get the little bit of buff they provide. See, moving on, we have the Boot, Onslaught, and Wall of Steel. So there's something about spear sweeping with these that people knew nowadays. Wow, I didn't hear his usage. Okay. So there's the spear sweeping trait in the red line that people who play the yellow line at endgame with the Rimmer Chant raid set bonus, I believe, that is when they use spear sweeping, and you actually use Onslaught and Wall of Steel for that, which would definitely have not been the case back in the day with this guide. And otherwise, these skills are useless. They do technically interrupt. The Warden back in the day also didn't have an interrupt. Now we have an immediate interrupt that is not a part of a gambit. But yeah, these are mainly used to interrupt. And yeah, that is it. And then spear sweeping again with the whole yellow line thing. So next up we have Reversal, Adroit Maneuver, Warden's Triumph. I actually used Range Warden's Triumph now as a yellow line Warden. These were not really worth using too much back in the day unless you actually had time to weave in the buffs for Warden's Triumph and Adroit Maneuver for melee. But the buffs are pretty weak overall. So often it wasn't even worth trying to do that just because the boost was so little. And then you can remove corruptions. That's still true today. I use 132 or R132 to remove corruptions. These are, yeah, too weak overall. So I have a maintenance, R132 one too. So back in the day, Yellow Line Warden was very different. So I won't go too much into the details just because it was so different. But that is no longer the case anymore, that it's the damage buff that makes it worth using alone. It's more of the Barb, Javelin, Bleed, and then you get a tiny damage buff to go with it if you have Shadow Javelins traded, that is. Let's see, Section 11, Combination Strike, Boar's Rush, those are useless, and yeah, they were useless back in the day. Resounding Challenge, Range Resounding Challenge. I am curious what I say on that. AoE range are 3231 is all ranged AoE, but in Assailment you can see they share the name, okay, where they are different. 3k total damage for the Assailment version versus almost 3k, wow. I'm actually surprised that the melee version was almost as strong as the range version back in the day, and that probably explains why I never used Range Resounding Challenge back then, because it was just weaker than it is now. Nowadays it's a very, very strong gambit that you always want to switch to the range stance. No matter what spec you are, it's always going to be useful and deal useful damage. Even as a tank, I would recommend switching to that just to get that AoE. So yeah, for the back in the day with the range, it was still actually frequently used, it looks like, for the damage. Even though it wasn't much, it was relative for what the yellow line had in the range stance, so it was actually pretty decent, it looks like. And still, I use the melee version, 3231, very rarely, but sometimes you can use it for AoE damage or burst AoE damage in melee. So not too much has changed there, very situational and very rarely used overall. These ones, the ranged version of Offensive Strike, Combination Strike, and Boar's Rush, I still do not use today. And I had a ton of info on these. So apparently the first two gambits were used frequently in chain, but maybe not the last one for some reason. So ranged Boar's Rush did very little damage back then, but relative again to what the Yellow Line Warden had back in the day, this was actually an okay damage combination, it seems like, which is definitely not the case today. Don't ever use those gambits in Yellow Line right now. As of update 28, getting towards update 29 with this video. And what are we? Early 2021 into February 2021. Okay, so as seen in part 4 of Gambits, after extensive testing, I found no dot applied by R12312. Yeah, that is one of the things we talked a little bit about. Ranged and Unerring Strike, it actually said this skill applies an additional damage over time effect to the target, but it did not. I actually do remember testing that. There is no additional, and I think I even did that a lot to test it, spam that over and over, if I remember correctly. That was so long ago though. But that is what I should have done at least. And nowadays, the Power Attack and Mighty Blow, those are not used, but Ranged and Unerring Strike, if you play the Yellow Line without Shattered Javelins, but with Barbed Javelins, then Ranged and Unerring Strike can be useful, and it will not guaranteed apply a bleed, but you have a chance to apply a bleed, and then it does have a guaranteed effect to apply a bleed. I think that's how it works. I usually play with Shattered Javelins because I don't have like that Merchant Raid set bonus and don't do the spear sweeping, so my Yellow Line build is geared more towards solo and easier, lower difficulty non-raid group content, so running like Stairs or 6-mans or other 3-mans with that. With the build I use with Shattered Javelins. So that's what goes on with my Warden. But here, what do we have? We have R313131. These, I very rarely will use Piercing Toss just to have a 3 gambit skill. If it's very quick, depending on the masteries I have available, sometimes I'll use that just to get the 3 gambit icon bleed from Barbed Javelins again. So a lot of Barbed Javelins talk, and we are done with page 6. Wow, we are not halfway through this. This is how I thought this guide was going to go, or this video. We are already over half an hour through this, it looks like. Wow. I know I'm saying wow a lot, but I was hoping to get through that maybe a little bit quicker. So specializations, trait trees, trait lines, and class traits. Okay. This was actually a nice table. In-game description is very inaccurate. Let's see what that actually says. Powerful, damaging build that stacks a single target bleeds with potential for sweeping AoE blows. That is kind of true, but it's actually true if you play a Yellow Line Warden nowadays, which is totally weird, and I'd still say because of that it's inaccurate. It's mainly about bleeding enemies and light damage over time, which is actually what I have in the text right here. And what does the Yellow Line one say? A ranged support line. It does have debuffs, but nope, it's not really a support line. It's a DPS line that might have a tiny bit of support built into the stuff, but a lot of classes actually have a tiny bit of support, you could say, built into them with minor effects, even if they are not a support class. Alright, best trait tree. Best for range damage and support, worse total damage than red's melee damage. Better than yellow's range damage. I would still say that is true today, only because the Yellow Line, you will be in melee quite a bit, even today. But it is still the best for range damage and support, but the range damage alone would be worse than the total damage than red's melee damage on an average fight, I will say. Sometimes you can get some crazy stuff going with Shattered Javelins with some huge AoE bursts with that, but outside of that, that is still generally true. It's just that the Yellow Line, and what did I do? The Yellow Line overall can do more damage than the Red Line. It has the potential. It's very RNG, and a little bit inconsistent depending if you have good luck or not, basically, with applying dots and sweeping dots with all that. Okay, so compared to the other classes, this should have been a bolded section on its own because it's important, I think. So Warden's blue line, let's look at that. Guardian blue, Captain yellow, Champion blue, Baroning blue. All three are similar in what they are tank and that they are tank. None are very similar. Warden tanking is too unique. Are all three similar? 1, 2, 3, 4. All four are similar. That whole sentence is messing me up right now. Warden tanking is too unique. That is true, and Baroning is still the closest. Warden tanking is weaker than all those except maybe Champion. They still could be weaker than Champion, but they're so different, I think. The Warden may be a little bit better of an AoE tank where you're not taking too much damage that you can't survive due to weak defenses, basically. Warden red line. Guardian red is still kind of the closest just because it bleeds, but there's nothing really close to it. Champion could also be considered somewhat close just because of the AoE damage, but Warden is more over time, and Champion is all more immediate damage, not really over time. Yellow line. Yellow Runekeeper is similar. I don't know where that came from. Oh, with more crits and fairly non-existent support. Yeah, I could actually kind of see that for back in the day. Nowadays, that would not be the case. Hunter Blue is somewhat similar, but less so than Runekeeper, can shoot on the move and focuses on crits as well. That is not really what Yellow Line Warden does any more. So these are not true, and the something, I don't know, but these are not true anymore. The Yellow Line is not similar to any of those, and Yellow Line is just too unique, I think. That's kind of true with a lot of these specs, but anyway, we can get moving on from that section. It is true, none will be truly similar to the Warden, just because the Warden is too different. Even without the Gambit system, they're still very unique. So as far as the viability, this should be interesting. The viability of the specs, which I just talked a little bit about. Okay, worse than heavy armor classes, that is true. Overall, not viable tank. That's a big nope nowadays. Let's see, otherwise usually stronger. Otherwise usually stronger than heavy armor classes when you don't need higher mitigation, so that can be true. Nowadays, this is a very important point. When you need those higher mitigations, which is basically for every content in the game that's not tier 1, I think, then Warden can be better for that easy stuff just because of the AoE damage and some of the self-sustain, which isn't really too true anymore compared to some of the other options. And it looks like I didn't even include Baroning here. Champion is mostly a weak tank still. Anyway, moving on from the tanks, worse at single target damage than Fire/Red Runekeeper. Wow. Competitive for number 2. Those times were different. Fire Runekeeper is one of the most neglected specs in the game, I think, and really is in a rough spot and has been a long time. As far as specs that need updated, that should be very high on the list, and I think as far as Runekeeper goes, is the one that needs the update most. I know a lot of people have that with the Yellow Line Lightning Runekeeper, but I personally think the Fire/Red line should be updated before the Yellow Line. It has a lot of issues with damage and scaling and things. But anyway, Warden over Champion for small target AoE, that might still be true today. Because the Yellow Line Champion really benefits from having a lot of targets hit, and that is true Warden over Champion for long fights, but Champion over Warden for short fights, and the large target amount Champion over Warden, and the Warden is similar for medium target amounts. I would still rate most of that pretty true. And yeah, it takes our damage over time abilities a lot of time to actually tick and do the same damage as what Champions can do in a couple seconds, so that is still true as well. So Yellow Line, yeah, everything is more than the Warden. Wow, Warden over Minstrel? If Floor Masters do more damage? So this is all different right now. Back in the day, maybe Minstrel was weaker back in the day, but Yellow Line Warden over Baroning Champion and Guardian for range damage? Oh, that was more of a joke, I think, about ranged for Baroning Champion and Guardian, just because they have bows and auto attack. But anyway, nowadays, the Yellow Line Warden would be above pretty much all these, except the Hunter might be more arguable. You'd have to play the Warden really well on the Yellow Line, I think, to get around what a Hunter can get. As far as maximum theoretical damage, I think the Yellow Line Warden would have the edge, but again, it's also RNG dependent. Okay, support, yeah, that's not really a thing with the Yellow Line Warden anymore. Review there. Oh, this is horrible. Yeah, this is a very bad way to do the traits. I just put the number of traits I put in for the trait line, so that makes basically no sense nowadays. DPS, roles, so I go into more detail about the roles and what you do. Yeah, there's some things there. There's not really much with the support. I went a little bit more into detail with the viability of the Warden to compare how it is nowadays to back then, so that's why we spent so long there. But yeah, just again skimming through this and going over what I think are more interesting things. Rotation. Okay, the rotation, I spent a lot of time going through a lot of, I guess, theoretical stuff as far as what could be useful, and then I'd go through examples of what's not good and why it's not good. It could be, I don't know, useful for somebody to learn, but I don't even know where I actually go through something that's useful and actually good. That is our single target. Okay, single target, here is our priority. Rotation gets a lot more complex at the start of the fight. That's an actual rotation rather than, a lot of this I think should be based on priorities. Yellow line. Okay, here we go. This is actually what I want. What to prioritize. Okay, this is taking me way too long to actually find it. See, I should have just had like, wow, we're on blue line. Proactive priority. Okay, here's our old melee damage priority. I don't even know what that old is from. I guess these are the priorities. Here's our real priority. That should have been basically the only thing in a description why that is the priority. This is definitely not true today. This is no longer our strongest kill. Again, the main thing with the Warden DPS is you use the strongest gambit first, get the most damage over time started first, and then you go through a rotation of priority list of the gambits based on the total damage they deal throughout their entire effect. And that is basically what you do. There's also stance swapping, which does make it a little bit more complex, but it's still the same basic idea with using the strongest stuff first. Blue line, yeah, I'm not going into all that detail with you all right now. If you really want to read what that was like back then, we do have the webpage, which actually doesn't look visible on OBS, but I will link this in the description if you want to go through all this stuff. The yellow line, of course, is not going to be the same just because it was changed so much. So yeah, that rotation is all out of date and way too much stuff that shouldn't have been in that part of the guide, I think. Here are stat targets. So I had 20% minimum and then 25% recommended for finesse. That is interesting because it's so hard to actually find information for what people use on finesse, but I still think 25% is a good target goal for that. 10% devastate chance, that's a little bit odd because nowadays I would recommend getting to the crit cap, which I believe is 25% without any percent buffs, and not really worrying too much about getting to the 10% devastate chance. Physical and tactical mitigation, I guess that's dependent on the content you are doing if you actually need the mitigation. That seems to change with so many endgame updates in LOTRO. Sometimes you really need to get tactical mitigation up, sometimes you need the physical mitigation, all that capped, and even more for the tier 2 cap, overcapping with that, and some content you don't. As far as I know, for example, Amda and Damal, the newest raid in LOTRO, as far as I know, you don't really need the mitigations as much, so you can just focus on basically becoming a glass cannon and increasing your DPS as much as you can. Okay, so I have some extra tank priorities. Morale filler, a certain morale threshold that you used to need. This is back at update 20, level 105 again. Primary stats, yeah, it's really agility slash vitality or vitality slash agility, depending what you want. Might is still a weaker version of agility and higher than fate. Will is useless. Fate is tiny bit of use. It's changed a lot. Fate has changed a lot since back in the day, but I still think it has a tiny bit of use. See, stats, yeah, stats actually don't work like this anymore. You do not get 8 physical mastery for your main stat. Might will give 2 physical mastery and agility will give 3 physical mastery now. And here are secondary stats. Okay, where you get them. Yeah, 25% crit is the baseline cap there. And apparently I had anything above 25% is not useful. I wonder if that is still actually true today. Resistance was only worth it from virtues. I'd still say that's true today. I don't know anybody that actually wants virtues in nowadays more modern LOTRO. So racial traits, okay, virtue traits. Virtues are very different. The virtue system was different back then. And again, virtues, what you want in virtues, unfortunately changes based on what you're doing. And for end-game content, if you're trying to build your virtues for end-game content, it is... the actual content again changes. Sometimes you might need to get tactical mitigation cap, but sometimes there will be raids with no fights where you actually need tactical mitigation. Some of them you might want resistance to survive better, but other ones you could just go full out with DPS ones. And again, I think nowadays most people use DPS ones. And the main virtue that I recommend for every class that can be good to get up, especially for higher levels, is loyalty. That is the #1 virtue that I am a fan of right now. Okay, gear, that is all not going to be the same today. Some of this info could be useful. So like with filling gaps, if you're missing pieces, okay. I thought that was about essences. So essences can actually fill some stats that you might not have from certain pieces of gear. And that would still be true today. What are legacies? This is what I'm interested in because I just imbued my Warden's LI on the Anor Legendary server, imbued the level 100 for stagers. For spear and javelin. So flat number increases are typically inferior due to stat caps and simply being too little numbers sometimes. That is still true today and even worse today because the flat numbers are just relatively even smaller. Okay, so these are bad legacies. Let's look at the good legacies. Wow, that's a lot of detail on the questionable legacies. But let's look at the useful one. Light damage. Yes, that's good. Light oil does not work on javelins with that, as far as I know. I don't know if it did back in the day, but I am pretty sure that's not how it works nowadays, at least. I could potentially be wrong, but I don't think that works. Surety of death damage over time, still good. Questionable for tank if there's nothing better. It should not be questionable for tank. There are hardly any good legacies for Warden. It is useful for ranged DPS yellow line Warden now. And that is true, you do want to be melee sometimes as a ranged DPS. Spear Gambit damage, that one is okay at best. It's not really strong for melee DPS. Gambit life tap damage, that used to be more great for solo and is even a little bit towards DPS back in the day, just with the Gambits being, life taps being a lot stronger. So yeah, it had that going for it, I guess, but that actually I sometimes will use just because there are so few legacies that are good. Sometimes I'll still even use that for tank and solo, just getting a little bit more out of those compared to the other useless stuff Warden has nowadays. Range damage is very good nowadays. That might even counter light damage for the highest priority legacy. It's not like you have to prioritize them. Fitting in range damage and light damage on a single LI is no problem. The ranged one, vitality and agility, it looks like I have. I also had that on the spear. I believe nowadays I try not to use agility just because it's so tiny. It looks like it used to be about 1 essence worth plus a tiny bit, which was slightly more useful back at level 105, I guess, compared to the tiny amount of stats they give nowadays for level 130s. Shield Gambit line healing, that one is good. Spear shield Gambit damage is slightly useful, but overall not too much. And then Fist Gambit skill damage, that one is very useful. Defiant Challenge damage return is also good if you have that traded, if you ever get that trait in the blue line, which I recommend if you are red line Warden to get that. And for a blue line Warden, if you ever play tank or solo, it will be quite helpful because the Reflect on Defiant Challenge is actually quite strong. So after all that time, I finally go through my actual build here, and I would have to look at the legacies list to see if I have the exact same things. I would not do Wages of Fear positional damage even in the L line nowadays. Javelin skill critical rating, not really worth picking either. So I have Rainbow Warden. I think this one, the point of this is it's supposed to work for every spec, which would probably be the best thing. That's basically what I do with my Warden, is I just have one LI, I have one spear and one javelin, and they work for all 3 specs because there are so few useful legacies that you might as well pick things that will work on all of them. And And it looks like these are my legendary items that I had back in the day. I noticed the DPS is a lot lower, but I know they went through a lot of scaling changes over the years with that and did some stat changes, so it looks like DPS back in the day was actually lower than it is now for a fresh level 100, or even somewhat ranked up probably. Level 100 of Beat LI I had. But yeah, that is what I had. Spear left, Javelin on top. I think the Javelin is on the right and Spear on the left. Character enhancements. Yeah, oil and shield spikes, those are still in chance. Food, of course, don't use those same ones. Don't use Goal of Anorian for the... I didn't realize I actually put in all this stuff as far as character enhancements. And this is a little bit of an annoying thing, kind of the attack damage and Tome of Defense. Of course, that stuff is useful, but all the stuff you can get from the store, I think a lot of people consider that type of stuff pay to win in LOTRO. Yeah, you can... I don't know if you can still get those from loot boxes just because I don't open loot boxes, but I think you can get them from Hobbit gifts. Alright, so we are on through page 10 out of 14. Wow, leveling. Okay. I don't know, I feel like I've spent so long on this. We're almost up to an hour, wow. Ooh, I actually had one of my somewhat newer videos. This was from 2017 about class traits, going in depth on those. I have class quests, just a lot of general information I think for these. Hopefully I didn't go into too much detail on the virtues again. This used to be the general rule for virtues. That is definitely not the case today. Physical mitigation I would not put at the highest priority. And again, virtues as a whole have changed, so I'm not going to go all too much into that. Leveling sections. Yeah, 75 to 95, that is where you get to a period of doing trait points. It's more actually 85 to 95. And then 95 to 100 kind of Central Gondor, a lot of that with trait points. And it is kind of true, I think, with the Warden, except now you get Range Resounding Challenge, I think roughly around level 80. I'm not entirely sure on the number. I should actually look that up at some point, but that would actually change gameplay a lot around this general period. Alright, so that is it with leveling. Not too much there for me to really review. Here's the frequently asked questions. Wow, we have 2 questions. I actually wonder what my answer would be to these nowadays. So how early can you solo group content? It depends what group content. Group quests can be soloable around 15 to 20 plus, depending on difficulty. 3-mans become more soloable 20 plus, especially level 30. So I actually think Great Barrow, I wonder if I could solo that at level 20. When you have the Gambit masteries, I think it will become a little bit easier. And after all this time, I'm sinking down in my chair. So yeah, action bar setup, that one I have changed a lot. I finally found something where I can actually use keybinds. My action bar setup is a lot different than I used to use. Those aren't really exciting questions, unfortunately. So catalog videos, this is just videos and images I use. That's actually something I think useful to have so you can see all the resources I link to. And I do have many additional videos, additional Warden videos on my YouTube channel if you all are interested, kind of including this one. And then I had a crying face for closing / the end just because it was so sad to have that after all these pages. And this is something that's actually true. If you want to support me in my efforts and my guides and my YouTube videos, then sharing is a very important thing, and checking my YouTube channel out as far as this goes. It took me 7 months to write and 8 to 9 months to complete. Wow. That was a lot in this guide. I can see why it took so long. Especially some of it, I think I had to test a lot of stuff where the Gambits go really into detail on that we skipped a lot of in this. But anyway, that is the Warden guide. There is one thing I wanted to check at the end now that we're getting really close to an hour long for this video, which I was honestly hoping this video would be 20 to 30 minutes. This was not supposed to take this much time out of my day, but it is okay that it did. I thought this was really fun just reviewing the Warden guide and giving you all maybe more up-to-date information with the Warden. But what I want to do is take a look at this video I have from Louis 7 on the Warden. And let me make sure I have my desktop audio. Okay, so we have the audio playing now.
Hi everyone, I'm gonna be playing my...
And you all can hear, I probably have to turn that way up actually. But hopefully y'all can hear this. It's very quiet, and this is what I used to sound like in videos. Now, mind you, this is over 5 years ago. But this is my old content, and it is kind of embarrassing, but we will watch just a minute of it.
Hey everyone, I'm going to be playing my Warden and Lord of the Rings Online. And in this one I decided I'd go ahead and try to solo an on-level Great Pharaoh. I'll start with the maze.
Okay, that is actually an okay intro, I will admit, even if my audio setup is not the best and I sound like I am very quiet. I don't know if I was quietly talking, that's probably the case. But that is what is going on, and for anybody unfamiliar, I did this, I had a Warden on Landreval that I did this on. So let's see, the gameplay audio is very loud. Probably should have turned that down. I can't really hear myself, I'm talking so inconsistently and softly. But I can't hear myself over the gameplay, unfortunately. That's one thing. I used to have my gameplay actually too quiet, I think. Let's see if I actually got through this.
That's the problem with building the Gambit chains, if something messes it up.
That is true, if you're trying to do the Gambit chain and something messes it up. Giving some random advice in there.
Sometime soon, but for now I gotta go and either do Evandem or Skirmish next one then. So I'll do one of those.
Alright, so that is the video. I just briefly wanted to watch that, and we can go ahead and close that out. Yeah, that looks like it is it, so I will transition to some background gameplay. And now I want to do a little bit of an outro, so as far as this video goes, I hope you all enjoyed it. It was really an exploratory type video for me. I thought it would be fun to do again. I did not expect it to take like an hour long almost to get through this, but I had fun doing that. So I want to give kind of my overall thoughts maybe on the guide very briefly, and I don't know, I still think it's okay. There are a lot of things I would do differently. First, it seems like I had a lot more focus on that guide back in the day. I think just nowadays, I just don't have time to do anything like that again, and that took a ton of time. I know I spent a lot of time working on that. I think I spent more time working on that guide than actually playing LOTRO and running content back then. So that would not be the case nowadays, especially with my YouTube channel. I did videos and things like that. But anyway, with the guide, there are parts that I think were too excessively long and just didn't need to be in it. The reason I included those, I think, back in the day was because a lot of that was to help you all learn how to learn the Warden in a way. And that was so people who understood the guide and went through it could actually write their own guide on the Warden based on stuff they learned, and they would just have all that knowledge on the Warden. So that was the goal of it. I don't know if it necessarily worked out to be the case with that, but yeah, that is what was going on with that, I think, kind of in short summary. I really hope it actually was useful for you all, though, to see me critique my old Warden guide and go through some more up-to-date stuff. I know a lot of it revolved around the Yellow Line Warden updates. That's at least what it seemed like. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know. If I don't know if there's anything like this that I could actually do in the future, just because I only wrote one mega comprehensive Warden guide that I don't really have anything else to review. But just in case something like this comes in the future, please do let me know any feedback, because I haven't done anything like this before. But again, if you all did enjoy, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member where I have updated the channel tier options. And you can do that to support the content, and thanks for watching, everyone.